So this is the 5th of my series of videos on Halloween Horror Nights 13, featuring our friend Paolo Ravinsky's cinematic terror. And I was talking about his house, the all-night die-in, and I had just wrapped up talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre scene that was the final scene in that house, as nearly as I can recall. So, after visiting those classic horror slasher films of the past, 3 of which would come back as the Carnival of Carnage a few years later, 4 years later actually, given their own houses with official sanction of New Line Cinema. Back in 2003 they couldn't quite do that, and so those characters weren't actually called that on the call sheets. They were called like Nightmare Man and Hockey Face Man, Chainsaw Dude, or whatever they called him. Well, the last house was a rerun of the previous year. We brought back Albert Kane, this time just in his own house. He wasn't stalking the streets because he wasn't the icon that year. No, that was the director. So Albert Kane remained in this house, Scream House Revisited. And it was largely the same, although it was made more to feature Albert in his mortician practice than the previous years had been, because he had actually been stuck into that house, which had a different concept when it was still supposed to be Cindy's event that year. So they made it more specific to Albert Kane. And I believe in the material for it does talk about it as being a Victorian manor. And however, it still wasn't the more stately Victorian manor it would ultimately become in 2006, although it was less working class in appearance than it had been the previous year. So it was starting to evolve. And it had a lot of the same scares, but again, you would see Dr. Kane a little bit more than you did the year before, along with other strange people who apparently were working for him in his funeral home. And that shared the same soundstage with the all-night die-in. So those were our lovely haunted houses that year. The year they upped the ante by giving us 6 rather than 5 haunted houses. Now that we covered all the haunted houses, we can go to what remains, which are shows. There were 2 major shows that year. The first one actually starred our friend Paolo, the director. It was called Infestation, and it was located in the Lost Continent. And when you got there, there was a stage set up that was rather ghoulishly set up with, and there would be Paolo himself up on the stage talking about his cinematic theory and how he wanted to cast his next feature to cast you, and he would get volunteers out of the audience to be a part of the show. And if you were fortunate enough to be cast up on the stage, he had a great wheel like the Wheel of Fortune. Remember how Vanna White, used to spin that thing on that well, I think she still does, on that game show at Pat Sajak. But this was not really a game show, because you wouldn't win. You'd only lose, no matter what came up. And on this wheel you would see, for example, a scorpion, or a rat, or maybe some kind of other vermin, snakes, and other nasty critters. And when you went up on the stage, he would fit you with a sort of mask, a protective little cover your nose and mouth, and a pair of swimmer's goggles, and then put you in a little box, or just your head, a little vitrine. It was glass with wooden frame, so everyone could see inside of it, but it's on your head, and you would be down here bound to the chair, so you couldn't do anything about it, but your head is in that box. So in that tiny claustrophobic space, depending on what came up when the wheel was spun, that's what gets to go in the box with your head. Yes, you could have a snake in there slithering. Oh dear, I've lost motion again. Can you still hear me? Is it working? It seems totally frozen up. Oh dear. Is it back? It's back. Okay. I hate when it does that. I don't know if it'll be as obvious but before, but that freaks me out. Okay, so a snake is in the glass with your face, or a rat would be in there, crawling over your head with his little teeny ratty feet, or perhaps a scorpion, or maybe more than one scorpions, and they're crawling on you. Oh dear, is he going to sting me now? He's a scorpion. All of these little creatures getting really up close. Your co-stars in this lovely little bit of cinema verite. And you're in there going, oh, please say cut. Please say cut. Oh, when your scene was finally over, unlike many of Paolo's performers, you actually survived. But he didn't give you any per diem or pay or anything. You didn't even get to go to the commissary and have anything to eat. No craft services for you. You ended up paying for the purpose because you the admission to get into it. Call the SAG office. Oh, it's a non-union shoot. Damn. Those directors. So, that was the show. The other show, of course, as always, was Bill and Ted's excellent Halloween adventure. Now, that year, the show featured so many Disney parodies. If they could not possibly do that show today with Disney being as litigious as they are now. The villains were actually not Disney villains at all. The main villains was Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. Remember, this was the year he went to war with Iraq. And so Saddam and Osama had snuck into the United States and were wreaking their terrorist evil here. And they were the bad guys. Other bad guys who helped them turned out to be Captain Barbossa from Pirates of the Caribbean and his evil pirate crew, Johnny Knoxville and Wee Man from Jackass. And he wheeled them around in a shopping cart, which was funny. That was their pirate ship. And there were many, many references to the classic Disney ride. At one point they broke down, and you heard the sort of Disney voice saying, "This ride is temporarily," And there were also Johnny Knoxville and Wee Man would at one point go, "We wants the redhead! We wants the redhead!" That sort of Disney gags happened quite a bit throughout the whole show. In addition to that, there was a little jokey reference to a certain clownfish that had been in movies, Finding Nemo. So they had a lot of fun with the competition that year. When Bill and Ted needed to fight the villains, other villains included Gollum from The Lord of the Rings, which had been going on for a few years now, and I should mention the heroes so you understand the villains. Bill and Ted had assistance from Charlie's Angels, and that's called kicking ass. And Captain Jack Sparrow, of course, although I think they called him Captain Jack Daniels or something to make a gag, doing a very good parody of Johnny Depp's character. Neo, Trinity, and Morpheus in the Matrix movies, which are having its sequels about this time. Laura Croft once again. And from television, from MTV and Spike TV, we had Captain Pimp. That's the character that Snoop Dogg played on his... What the hell was that show? I don't think I ever watched that show. It was called Televizzle, Fizzle, Sizzle, Mizzle. I don't know what the hell it was called. It was some weird name. It was Televizzle Fashizzle or something. I forget. But it was a show that was on MTV. And on Spike TV, there was an animated show called Stripperella, which I think had Pamela Anderson as the voice of this super heroine who was kind of a slut. And she was one of the heroes as well. And they fought against the villains, including Demi Moore, bad guy from bad girl from Charlie's Angels, along with those funny white albino dreadlock guys from The Matrix who were twins, and they had, Milli Vanilli jokes about them. They would do the Milli Vanilli lip sync dance. And so there was a lot of course, conflict between the heroes and villains, and bad guys and good guys fighting it out. And eventually, if you want to talk Deus Ex Machina, this was the ultimate. God comes in at the end to set things right. God, as played by Morgan Freeman and Bruce Almighty. God was referenced in the very beginning of the show, in a way, and one of my favorite gags ever at Halloween Horror Nights is when they gave the usual disclaimer: if you don't like explosions and scantily clad males and females and, bad language, all of the stuff that you have with Bill and Ted, although they didn't have that many bad language in those days, but all the stuff that, they if you don't like this sort of thing, then why don't you just go down up I-4 and visit Holy Land Horror Nights. And that just made me laugh. Can you imagine what Holy Land Horror Nights would be? And then, of course, at the end, singing and dancing for no reason with popular hits at the time. And don't remember too many of the popular hits of 2003, but I'm sure Justin Timberlake was in there somewhere. He wasn't ripping off anyone's bras, but he was still there to sing and dance a little bit. And that was basically the Bill and Ted Show in 2003. And that, amazingly, allows me to finish Halloween Horror Nights history for Halloween Horror Nights 13 in only 5 videos. Not 9, but 5. So maybe I'm getting better at being more succinct in doing these, even with props and everything else that I had this time. So that's cool. So next time I shall return with Halloween Horror Nights 14, which had 2 times the fear when it encompassed both Universal Studios Florida and Islands of Adventure, parts of both parks. It was the first and only time they've ever managed to do that, and it was a landmark year for many, many reasons. So that will be very interesting indeed to get into. Until then, pleasant screams.